Hey tankers, and welcome back to World of Tanks with PR154. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to go on a good old-fashioned rant. Now, we need to talk about the recent changes and unchanges to the matchmaker. And I want to talk about this specifically with how it relates to the ANZ server. And as someone who literally puts their money where their mouth is when it comes to supporting the ANZ server, I feel like I can speak with some authority on this topic. So one of the obvious issues with ANZ server, we're a lower population server, we carry lower tier availability, and accordingly there is a higher risk of longer queues or even timeouts. Now, how do the timeouts happen? Well, that's because the matchmaker is looking at the constellation of players and vehicles that are available. It tries to match them up in the best way it can with the rules that it have available to us. Ideally, it's looking to match up tier for tier, 15 versus 15. If it can't do that, it soft fails to another configuration and another configuration. And then it might go to different tiers, 14 versus 14. I don't know the exact ins and outs of it, but at the end of the day, you have a minimum team size of 13 versus 13. Now, what the matchmaking changes were supposed to do was to also introduce a couple of extra layers of soft fail that you could have a 12 versus 12, 11 versus 11, or 10 versus 10 game, and thus increase your chances of entering the queue, having a shorter queue time, and having a higher likelihood of getting a game at the vehicle tier that you wanted. So the ability of the matchmaker to soft fail to these 10 versus 10 battles was well intentioned and good in principle, and it created the capacity to shorten the queue times, improve the tier availability, and in the case of the ANZ server, effectively seed an earlier ANZ server peak to draw players who might ordinarily be playing on Hong Kong, chasing the high reliability at the cost of maybe ping, packet loss, and sanity, and try to achieve some critical sustainable mass on the ANZ server for the more routine 15 versus 15 play. And to be fair, this is also the goal of our Cash for Cantons promotion, so if you don't know anything about that, then please check out the details below. Yeah, it's a little bit off topic, but it's my video, I'll do what I want. Now, unfortunately, this new matchmaker didn't work as advertised, didn't work as intended. It had some super aggressive soft fail settings resulting in an underrepresentation of those 15 versus 15 and 14 versus 14 games, and an extreme overrepresentation of 11 versus 11 and 10 versus 10 games. And that was happening even in cases of high server population. Like, it was even happening when there were like 6,000 bodies on Hong Kong. Like, you don't need it when there's 6,000 bodies on Hong Kong. So accordingly, people from Hong Kong were angry because they had this solution to problems of the ANZ server thrust upon them, and they go, well, we don't have population problems here on Hong Kong. Why are you thrusting us with these low population solutions to a problem that doesn't exist? So naturally, they were all pissed off about it. Even players on ANZ server, they responded in a manner that was barely shy of froth at the mouth rage, and they provided really quite little in the way of objective feedback. All the while, they were rather conveniently forgetting that fact that, hey, you've got improved availability of higher tiered vehicles and you've got shorter queue times. But no, instead they'll focus on the negatives of this, of what is ostensibly a work in progress. But look, there are a crap ton of negatives of having your entire session comprising 10 versus 10 and 11 versus 11 games. The game is not optimized for it. We know that. The missions aren't optimized for it. Some vehicles and maps certainly aren't optimized it. The feedback was pretty loud on that. I don't want to dwell on the point. Ultimately, the issue is that these smaller population games were just being triggered by the matchmaker way too aggressively. And I don't feel that we were given proper opportunity for those 14 versus 14 and 15 versus 15 games to crystallize. So what was essentially a pretty poor rollout of the first pass of this new matchmaker, it was kind of exacerbated by minimal community consultation from Wargaming, and players were left pretty stunned. They were unclear as to what the future of World of Tanks Asia was going to look like. They weren't sure if they're going to be able to complete their campaign missions. Some people aren't even convinced they're going to complete their dailies. So there was an overwhelmingly negative response, and in the face of that overwhelmingly negative response, Wargaming basically threw the baby out with the bathwater and decided they were going to roll back the matchmaking changes with no indication as to whether it would actually be reviewed in the future. Well, that is perhaps with the exception to Tank Destroyer matchmaking, which was actually received quite positively, although good luck with your MT-15 missions, but we can sort that out later down the line. So I feel that the degree of rage was unjustified, and I felt that the response by Wargaming to just chuck the whole thing out was entirely the wrong move. Dialing back that soft fail aggression would have just remedied the main issues, and it still would have preserved our ability to seed the ANZ server for more reliable queuing and tier availability. And on the whole, this has just been a broadly disappointing affair. This rare occasion of we actually get developer time for ANZ Server, dedicated to persistent issues that we have in the ANZ Server with respect to queue times and tier availability. It's just been squandered by a poor rollout, an unproductive hate train from the player base as well. And I just really hope that all parties, developer, publisher and consumer, can just strive to do better and make the ANZ Server a more enticing place to play. It's going to rely on wargaming consulting with the community, it's going to rely on the player base providing constructive feedback, and it's going to rely on wargaming acting on that feedback. So in the meantime, look, I'm going to keep putting my money where my mouth is with ANZ Server Cache for Count-ins. Again, the goal is to improve queue times and tier availability to the extent that I can improve them in the course of my stream. The rest is going to be up to the ANZ Server player base to do that outside of those stream times. So that's about enough ranting for me. In the meantime, happy tanking and take care out there.